Bonjour, Kinamagian in Ireland Dishnikas, and welcome to today's episode of Social Studies Explorer. Today's episode, The War in the South, Day 1. In a previous section, we talked about the British defeat at Saratoga in the north. What would you have done next? Would you have continued to fight in the north? Or would you have done what the British did and decide to shift your attention to the southern colonies, moving your entire army base all the way from what's New York, Boston, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, down to states such as Maryland and Virginia, the Carolinas, Georgia. Once the British decided that they were moving south, George Washington, with the help of French troops, moved south also. As you recall, once we defeated the British and General Burgoyne at Saratoga, the French began aiding our American war effort. We will find, and you may have realized in a previous lesson, that the last major battle was Yorktown. That's where the French had blockaded the harbor, which cut off supplies from the British, while George Washington, along with his French allies, had moved south to cut off the city. That creates what we call a siege. A siege is an example of a siege. Here's your city, and let's call it Yorktown. And you set up your armed forces, let's use pink here, to surround the city. That allows nothing to get in and nothing can get out. Once you're in this situation of a siege, your supplies will eventually dwindle. The Americans and French over here were able to get supplies from local farms. With the ocean over here being blockaded by French troops, nothing could get over from England to support them. It was only a matter of time before the British had two choices: fight your way out of the siege or surrender. Sorry, 1 second to get the back there. There we go. Key things to remember from this section. After Saratoga, the British decided to shift their attention to the south. George Washington follows them, defeats them at Yorktown. Some word cards. Traitor, someone who betrays their country. In the United States, we still consider the epitome of being a traitor to be Benedict Arnold. Benedict Arnold, who was initially a well-decorated patriot soldier, became disillusioned with his command and eventually had offered up West Point, yes, that West Point that's now the home of our United States Military Academy, to the British. Although it failed, Benedict Arnold was forever shamed and would end up dying later on in England as an embarrassment. Surrender, and you see the white flag here, means to give up. Surrenders are supposed to be that, okay, we've lost, please don't annihilate my soldiers. We will just go peacefully, we'll give up our arms. In this era, surrender would be signified quite often by the handing over of a sword. I have a question here for you. You see this image. What do you think is happening here? If you said that this was an image of the surrender to Washington of Cornwallis's forces, you would be correct. As you can see here, we have the Americans, we have the French out to sea. The Americans are looking pretty happy. They're in their finest gear. The British don't look so happy, and their cannons have gone silent. Not sure in the real world if you'd have let the British that close to your cannons. Just saying. You can see a map of where this is fought. You can see Maryland is going to be up here. Virginia at this time was a lot larger. What's now West Virginia was part of Virginia. Maryland up in this area, Chesapeake Bay, Yorktown down here. Then we also had North Carolina, South Carolina, and the state of Georgia. A timeline of events in the South. By December of 1778, the British had captured Savannah, Georgia. Savannah was a pretty important port, not too far north of Spanish-controlled Florida. By June of 1779, Spain declares war on Britain. The Spanish were allies at this time with the French against the British, and particularly disliked the British. They didn't want to go on the full alliance, which probably tells you that they weren't sure the Americans would win, so there's definitely a good reason for the Spanish. That may be something to look into on another day. But Spain starts making war on Britain, which is still going to benefit the Americans. By late September, the Americans' attempt to take back Savannah doesn't go well. Just to show you the scope of a world war that we were in, John Paul Jones actually fought a battle with a British warship off the coast of Britain. He was able to capture the ship before his own ship sank. What we don't understand from the American perspective, the Revolutionary War was a world war. The British, we know, are fighting in North America. They're fighting off the coast of Europe. They're fighting in the Caribbean. By 1779, General Clinton tried to sail from New York with 8,000 soldiers for Charleston, South Carolina, which was a major port and remained a major port even through the Civil War. That's actually the port where Fort Sumter was located, and the Civil War would go on there. The Americans suffered their worst defeat in May of 1780. The British captured Charleston, along with 5,400 American soldiers and 4 American ships. That's a lot of soldiers. Fortunately, with 2 months later, 6,000 French soldiers led by General Rochambeau arrived at Newport, Rhode Island to help the American cause. By 1780, Benedict Arnold was appointed commander of the fort at West Point. Oops, that didn't turn out well. And in August, the Battle of Camden, New Jersey, General Gates, who had won the Battle of Saratoga, was defeated by General Cornwallis. Many loyalists supported the British. This gave the British firm control of South Carolina. Camden, South Carolina. My apologies. John Andre was a pretty important major. I encourage you to read that if you can. It's pretty difficult in this image, so I'm not even going to try it. Let's see though if I go to a link, if we can actually get a better copy of it. This may or may not work. Nope, that didn't. And this one goes under the may not. John Andre was a very the spying, very much related to spies. And there's a current Netflix program that really covers how General Andre and the spies on both sides interacted in the North. Decoded letter. Let's get to right here. This letter was from General Benedict Arnold to a British officer. Um, this would be very bad for him. Enclosed in a cover addressed to Mr. Anderson, 2 days since I received a letter without date or signature, informing me that Sir Henry was obliged to me for intelligence, communicated, and that he placed a full confidence in the sincerity of my intentions. On the 13th instant, addressed a letter to you expressing my sentiments and expectations, viz. That the following preliminaries be settled previous to cooperating. First, that Sir Henry secured to me my property, valued at £10,000 sterling, to be paid to me or my heirs in case of loss, and as soon as that happens, shall happen, £100 per annum, which means per year, to be secured to me for life in lieu of the pay and emoluments I give up for my services as they will receive. If I point out a plan of cooperation by which Sir Henry shall possess himself of West Point, the garrison, £20,000 sterling, I think will be cheap purchase for an object of so much importance. At the same time, I request £1,000 to be paid to my agent. I expect a full and explicit answer. The 20th, I set off for West Point. Personal interview with an officer that you can confide in is absolutely necessary to plan matters. In the meantime, I shall communicate to our mutual friend Stansbury all the intelligence in my power until I have the pleasure of your answer. July 15th, 1780, to the line of my letter of the 13th. I did not add 7. Um, what if you're kind of a history buff, you'll probably start recognizing some of these names. Uh, I recognize quite a few of them because, well, my wife loved the TV show that was about the spies, and some of these names are very familiar to it. At this point, we're going to wrap up today's lesson. There will be just a few questions for you to answer in the Google Classroom. And we look forward to hearing any conversation or questions you may have. Have a minute, Gijigad, Minwa, Kamapi.